I didn't. Oh, okay. All right, we're all set then. Thank you, Stephanie, for World Childless Week. It's been brilliant this year and for making this webinar our first on sensitivity and childlessness possible. A warm welcome to our wonderful panelists and listeners also. So as she said, please make yourselves comfortable, connect in the chat, and we'll get started since we have a lot to cover in 1 hour. Sensitivity comes from a highly receptive nervous system. It's a biological and genetically based trait, which means sensitive people are different in many ways. They often see what others miss. Their deep processing skills help them see a need for change or a tipping point before others do. They can also be very process-oriented rather than goal-oriented. Sometimes we could use more of that. Sensitive people are holistic thinkers. They have a big picture perspective and therefore may offer uniquely constructive solutions to problems. They're also people who notice patterns and therefore will notice how to change them, contributing in important ways to the evolution of the human race. Sensitive people have a natural transpersonal perspective and a preference for collaborative processes over adversarial ones. Highly sensitive people are natural visionaries, peacemakers, creatives, and humanitarians. The work of processing so much sensory information in our complex and fast-paced world takes a lot of time and energy. Sensitive people often need to take more time than others to process information and feelings to discern what they want to do. This need can affect their choice of work and affect relationships and decisions, including marriage and children. And today we're going to discuss the intersection between sensitivity and childlessness and learn from our panelists how sensitivity has impacted their lives, including having a family of their own. But before we get into our discussions, let's meet our panelists, starting with the UK. And Ginny, perhaps you will go first.
Thanks, Maria. Yes, my name is Ginny and I'm a highly sensitive person. I'm childless by circumstance, in simple terms, because the long-term partners that I chose didn't want children, and I ran out of time to find someone who did.
And you've been involved with the childless community for a long time now? And you've been involved with the chanting circle?
That's right. Yes, yes, I do enjoy the chanting circle very much. That's very much, you know, my kind of an activity in life.
Mm-hmm. And that wonderful song.
Oh yes, Calm After the Storm. Yes, yeah, that was something that I came to after it had been recorded, because it was part of a study, and Helen Louise Jones, who used to run the singing group and who runs the chanting, she was instrumental in making that happen along with Laura. And we sung it at the Chester event last year in the UK as well. So it's very
a beautiful
special.
song.
Yeah.
And any childless women who have not heard it, I highly recommend that you go ahead and choose.
Oh yes, Stephanie's saying Childless Storyhouse. Thank you. I couldn't think what the name was. But yeah, there's a video on YouTube as well, which people could take a look at, which is very nice.
Well, it's great to have you today.
Thank you.
Karen, how about you?
Hi, I'm Karen Morione, and please forgive me if my voice shakes a little bit. This is honestly my first time speaking out as a childless woman. I'm still finding my voice, and I think as I think about how sensitivity, well, we'll get into that when we have the questions, but let's start with my name, Karen Morione. I live in Stone Mountain, Georgia, which is a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia in the US. I am also childless by circumstance, although very early on, my mother gave me a book about, we never had the talk that mothers often have with their daughters about oh, you're becoming a woman now and you're gonna have periods and you're gonna be the one to carry the baby and all of that. Never had that talk. She gave me a book that explained it all in very clinical terms with graphic illustrations. And that terrified me. And as a highly sensitive person, it took me a long time to process that. And I never spoke about that to anybody until well after my childbearing years. And then, so I made up my mind early on that I was never going to try and carry a baby to term. But then later on, as I got older and realized, well, you kind of have to do that if you want kids. But then I also have a condition called Leiden factor 5, which is a
Oh.
clotting disorder. And I had my first clot at 18 as a result of going on the birth control pill. And I was in the hospital for 10 days. And when I checked out of the hospital, I asked the doctor, what does this mean for me, this condition, for the rest of my life? And he very calmly and matter-of-factly and pretty much dismissively said, if you ever get pregnant, you'll have another clot. You'll go through this experience again. And it'll be really hard for you to actually carry a child to term anyway, because this condition predisposes you to miscarriages.
Oh, wow.
And so I did have a couple of miscarriages. And then I had another clotting episode in my early 30s. And at that point, and I was in the hospital with that one for the better part of 4 months on and off. And after that, my husband and I said, we're not, he basically said, I would rather have you and no child than potentially lose you and a child, because we persist in trying to create a child. So childless by circumstance.
Okay.
And in terms of childless groups, I am a member of the Childless Collective. I am host or co-host of several of the interest groups on Childless Collective. And I really didn't start thinking of myself as childless as opposed to child-free until probably 3 or 4 years ago, when I realized, wait a minute, just because I chose to prioritize my health, that doesn't mean that I didn't choose to have children. And that's been a long process for me to work through. And as you said about sensitive people, it does take us time to process.
Absolutely.
It took me 50 years to figure out, oh, wait, no, I'm not child-free, I'm childless.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you.
Thank you.
And I'm Maria Hill. I live in Lynchburg, Virginia, on the East Coast, a little south of Washington, D.C. And I've been part of the Childless Collective now from the very beginning, when it was Gateway Women. And I hosted the sensitive group there for over 10 years. And I have a website, Sensitive Evolution for Sensitive People. And I'm also a World Childless Week ambassador. So we also were expecting Amy Perman. We're hoping that she's able to make it. Apparently she's been detained, and but hopefully she'll be able to join us. So what we want to do is get right into our questions. So one thing I want to point out to everyone is that one of the interesting things about sensitive people is that every single sensitive person is different. I've worked with sensitive people for a long time, and it's actually been very amazing to me just how different sensitive people can be. So we're going to explore sensitivity and childlessness, but keep in mind that, we all are very different, and those sensitive people among us who are listening, you may find that that's the case for you as well, and you may resonate with some things and not with others. So let's get started. When did you know you were different? And when did you know you were a sensitive person? You've already spoken a little bit about that, Karen. Ginny, you want to go first?
Sure, yes. So I was very aware when I was a small child that within my family that I was different, that I behaved differently, that I reacted differently compared to everyone else in the family, possibly with the exception of my mum.
Oh.
But she was a parent, so how do you know that sort of that status, if you like, in the family dynamic? And it really was a source of ridicule in the family. my sensitivity. I mean, I think that if you spoke to them as non-sensitive people, they might remember that as teasing. But of course, being a sensitive person, I felt it very strongly, which is, of course, the thing about the sensitive experience. So I always knew and had it pointed out to me that I was different. You know, the sort of, oh, why are you crying, or why are you so sensitive? You know, all those kind of remarks. And I didn't really know that there was such a thing as high sensitivity or sensory processing sensitivity until I was about 50.
Okay.
So I was having my hair cut, and my hairdresser, we were chatting, and he was telling me that he was a highly sensitive person. And as he was talking to me, it suddenly dawned on me. I thought, oh, this is me. You know, so that was really the first time, you know, that I realized that there was a term, you know, for my disposition. I call it my disposition.
Did you feel accepted in your family?
No.
Okay.
I did by my mother, and looking back now, I think she was highly sensitive.
Oh, that helps a little.
Yeah, I mean, we were so alike. It's just
Okay.
like peas in a pod, peas in a pod.
That's great.
So, you know, she was I suppose, my silent ally. You know, she would, if it was just the two of us, she was so kind to me.
Oh, that's good.
You know,
That's
it's like if
wonderful.
I could get to her without anybody else being around, she would usually be very kind to me. But when the rest of the family around, so my father or my siblings were around, you know, she would sort of toe the line of the family dynamic,
Okay.
if you see what I mean.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you know, that was the way that things worked in the family.
Cool. That's
Yeah.
interesting. I'm glad you had that. How about you, Karen? Did you have anything similar or?
Well, yes and no. I was an only child for the first 8 years of my life. And
Oh,
so,
okay.
um, you know, I had great parents for the first 8 years of my life. They did a great job of raising me and exposing me to things. And both my parents loved to read and taught me to read. I think I was reading real books by the time I was about 3. And so reading has always been my refuge when the world got to be too much for me. And then and we moved around a lot. That was another factor for me. And in the chat, someone I think someone may have mentioned bullying, or maybe I just read something that reminded me of bullying. I did get bullied a lot in school as a child. And part of that, I'm sure, was the fact that I was often the new child because we moved around a lot. I was also highly gifted, and I think a lot of sensitive people are also gifted based on the little bit that I've learned about it. And so I would go into a new classroom, and usually it was small towns, and I would upset the grading curve and disrupt the status structure. And that was true for me throughout my elementary and grade school and high school career. So I always knew I was different, like Jenny, and I imagine like you, Maria. I was often told, oh, you're too sensitive. I was often teased, often bullied, and told, oh, you're too sensitive, don't worry about it, but not by my parents.
That's great.
And I had my only brother at 8. And then 6 months after he was born, my father passed away from cancer. And that was very hard. And I retreated into my books again. And my connection with my mother was, to a degree, I won't say severed, but it was severely weakened, because she was exhausted. She was grieving, and she had a 6-month-old infant that needed all the energy she could muster. So from that point on, I was pretty much left to raise myself. She did end up remarrying, and I have step siblings that are. We were not the Brady Bunch, but we are family. We do think of each other as family, and they never teased me. They were always kind, but they were only there for 2 or 3 weeks out of the year. So my sensitive experience was spending a lot of time alone with my books, with my pets, and wondering, why don't I fit in? Why do people always tease me?
I understand. Well, I grew up in New England, Greater Boston, and I'm the oldest of 5. And I knew from the time I was a couple of years old that I was different. And it was really because everyone kept talking at me. There was no real conversation, and my experience of what people were talking to me about was totally different. And so I knew there was something, you know, and so and it was not a happy family. And so I went to books as well. Love books. You know, I was one of those people who just love doing homework. Oh my goodness, if I can get through dinner and go do my homework, I'm a happy camper. I'll be left alone. But there was always too much work to do. I'm being the oldest of 5 and taking care of siblings and all of that kind of stuff, you know, that goes with it. And so, but yes, I loved the books. I did not get told I was too sensitive. On the contrary, I think they thought that I was much too energetic in some ways, because I've always been a feminist. And so I was, you know, tended to show up and say what I think. And, you know, I was active. I wasn't as passive as I think they wanted me to be. So I got feedback along those lines. And when it came around to school, I did get bullied myself, and I got beaten up on because my clothes were weird, you know, and being smart, just like a lot of other sensitive people, it's not welcome, particularly in women. So anyway, I had some very similar experiences. I can't say that my mother and I were close. I wish that had been the case, but we really weren't, because she was much, much too traditional for me, and very dogmatic about it. And so we just, you know, did not really connect. So anyway, you know, that was my experience. It was definitely challenging. And in some ways, I'm glad I had it, because it forced me to do a lot of processing at a very young age. And when you do that as a sensitive person, I think you own yourself and who you are better than if you say, oh, I'm sensitive, so therefore you do the exploring of self that you have to do when you're sensitive. And I think there's a great advantage in that, even though it may not always be fun, you know. So let's talk about what happened when you started to think about your life. How was being different supported when were you encouraged or discouraged from being out in the world and making a life for yourself? And what did you think about as you were growing up, maybe in your adolescence, what you wanted for your life? And did being different alter your expectations? Because sometimes when we get feedback, it does affect how we begin to think of our possibilities in the world. So how was that during your adolescence? Whoever wants to go first is fine.
Adolescence. I feel that I came from a family which was very much of my parents' generation. You know, as long as you were fed and, you know, sent to school and you had a roof over your head, then that was pretty much, you know, the job done.
Yeah.
And so I don't really remember support, to be honest. You know, I mean, I don't remember being discouraged either.
That's good.
But I think actually, you know, that was probably the same for all of us. You know, I don't think it was anything to do with my sensitivity.
Oh, okay. So,
But I think the key thing for me about this, you know, as I became a teenager, was the combination of being sensitive and my family dynamic made me very lacking in confidence.
Mhm.
So I was very much trained, you know, to be the traditional sort of stereotypical, you know, wife and mother. And to be obedient, you know, obedience was really everything in our family, within the family and without, you know. So being a citizen, an obedient citizen, and also, you know, being an obedient family member. And I mean, I was really indoctrinated into that, and that's what I carried on doing, you know, right up until, you know, I was about 50, which is about 10 years ago. So I think that, you know, it was a bit like, you know, I was sort of caught in these, in a bit in between being sensitive and this family dynamic. And so my self-esteem was virtually non-existent, you know. Confidence was a mystery to me. I remember thinking about it at various times, you know, throughout my adult life, and thinking, you know, what is this? What is it? What is this confidence thing? You know, people would say, well, you know, you've just got to pretend, you know. And eventually I did get that. But, you know, it took a long time. And I had to, you know, it was only after I learned that being highly sensitive was legitimate. That's really, I think, was the turning point for me, because then I could start to build myself up, and I was searching and finding the tools, you know, to I suppose deprogram myself, I would say, you know, and reprogram myself in a way that suits my high sensitivity. So I think really I had very little in the way of expectations. I was being obedient. So it was like, get a job, get married, have children. That was what I was trained for, you know. And that's really, you know, what I did. But the irony of it being, you know, that there were these generational patterns at play in sort of behind the scenes, if you like, which were, now I look back on it, I didn't understand it at the time, but I now see that, you know, I was attracting people who were just like me, who either had been emotionally abandoned, which was, I think, my story in my family, or they actually, you know, they had lost a parent when they were very young. So it was either both or one or the other. So it was like, you know, that was always tripping me up. That was always tripping me up. So it's the supreme irony of my life, you know, that the very thing I was being trained for, it could not manifest, if that makes sense. I don't know whether that makes sense, but
yeah, it does, because I think as a sensitive person, you do get you don't get validation really for your sensitivity. And if you look around the world today, the effort put in to invalidating the real intelligence of people, it's not just applied to sensitive people, it's applied to everyone. We're seeing a real watershed moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's because basically we are reclaiming our intelligence. I mean, if you're going to have democratic societies, you need people to be welcoming of and inhabiting their intelligence. And so sensitivity brings us a huge amount of intelligence. And we need to be able to claim that, but it's hard in a world that invalidates us. So yeah, it is a process. And I don't know about you, but I remember feeling the same problem with confidence. And I thought to myself, I want the real deal or nothing at all. Give me the real deal.
Yeah, I think that's what I was waiting for. I was waiting for, you know, something real and genuine. I didn't really want to pretend. I didn't want to pretend at anything.
Yeah, I'm not good at that. Thank you. Karen, how about you? Did you have trouble
it's funny
with confidence?
it's funny, Jimmy, that you say you didn't want to pretend, because pretending was what got me through in a lot of ways. And I will say, once my mother got to a point where she was able to be more present for me, which was probably around the time that I was 10 or 11, our relationship was still strained because of the virtual non-communication of the grieving years, but because I was grieving too. And for me, and I honestly, at this point, I think I did it to myself more than it was a family thing, but there is a thing called the family scapegoat. And I kind of took on that role. When my dad was sick, and he was sick for about a year before he died, I didn't understand, why, because coming from the Deep South, religion is a thing here. And I'm not religious. And in fact, my mother is Jewish and my father was Methodist. But whenever we would move to a new place, one of the ways that I would try to integrate was going to one of the local churches, going to Sunday school, trying to, the few friends that I made, if they went to a church, I would go to their church. And when my dad was sick, we were living in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is a larger town. And so I was asking a lot of questions. Why is he sick? Why, why him? Why not somebody else? What is cancer? All of that. And I remember, and my mom swears she doesn't remember this, but I remember either her or one of my grandmothers, who were both staying with us during my dad's illness, taking me to a rabbi and a Catholic priest and a Methodist minister and a Baptist minister, and taking me to all of these religious leaders because they couldn't answer my questions. And they said, well, these are intelligent men, and they were all men, and you can ask them and maybe they'll have answers for you. And I'm sure that this is not what I took away from this at 8 years old. I'm sure is not what these learned men intended for me to take away. But what I took away was that my dad's illness was a test for me. And if I passed the test, he'd get well. If I failed the test, he would die.
Oh.
And again, I don't think that's what any of them intended, but I was an 8-year-old girl and I took things very, very literally. And so when they were giving me their platitudes about God's will and, how God does test his chosen people, so on and so forth, that's what I took away. And so for many, many years, I believed I deserved to be punished. I believed that I did not deserve love. I did not deserve that I had caused my father to die. I was the bad thing. And so I never talked about that. Carrying that knowledge for the many, many years that I did shut me down. And I did not talk to my mom about that. I did not talk to anyone about that. And when we would move to a new town and the kids would tease or bully me, I tried very hard to fit in. I wanted to fit in, but when I couldn't fit in, somehow that was my fault too, because I developed a habit of everything being my fault. So the question being, being what I wanted for my life, I wanted to fit in. I wanted to belong. I wanted to have a tribe. And did being different affect my expectations for my life? Absolutely. I didn't think I would ever find a tribe. And ironically enough, I found similar souls and bits and pieces of a tribe, but it wasn't until I joined the Childless community that I began to realize, oh, wait, it's not all my fault. And there are lots of other people like me who have been through maybe not the same experiences, but certainly similar experiences, similar enough that they can understand my experiences and relate to them and have empathy and hold space for me. And so honestly, becoming a part of the Childless community, which I didn't really do until about 5 years ago, has been one of the most healing things I've ever done in my life. And now I'm starting to think about what do I want for the rest of my life. And while it's scary because I'm aging, and I know this is not that webinar, but I think, as I think about what do I expect for the rest of my life, as a highly sensitive person aging without children, without family, I just want to find that tribe that will support and sustain me, that will be there for me should I need help, and that I can help if they need help, that will be truly my tribe going forward.
Yeah, you need your own family,
Yeah.
basically.
And it's going to have to be a family of choice because I don't have the family of birth. One thing that I didn't mention yet was that when I was 24 and he was 16, my only blood brother was killed by a drunk driver. So
Wow.
that was another setback and another moment of, and I found a way to blame myself for that too, because it happened on New Year's Eve and I had gone home or gone back to school to go to a party. And if I felt like if I had stayed home, then either I would have gone with him to his high school party with his buddies, or he would have stayed home with me. And the truth is he probably wouldn't have, and I probably wouldn't have, and it still would have happened. I just would have been there instead of elsewhere. But that was another burden of blame and shame that I carried with me for a very long time.
Wow, that is an awful lot. I'm so sorry you experienced all that.
Thank you. I think being highly sensitive made it difficult for me to, I think being highly sensitive made it my responsibility in some way. But I think learning to work with my sensitivity and coming to understand that this is a deeply rooted part of who I am has helped me let go of the shame and the blame. So finding, and Maria, I think I told you this earlier, but I didn't know what high sensitivity was until I joined Gateway Women, now Childless Collective, and found your group for highly sensitive people and started, I said, well, I think that might be me. Let me check this out. And I went to your website and I read about highly sensitive people, and I found books there and started reading about it. And I was like, ding, 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 light bulbs going off, pennies dropping all over the place. And that really, suddenly I had something to talk to my therapist about.
Yeah.
That was a concrete way that I could identify with my therapist. This is why I think I am the way that I am. Help me build the tool set that I need to navigate the world, knowing this about myself now. And that's why I think I've done more healing in the last 4 or 5 years than I had done in the entire 60 years before that.
Right. Well, you deserve some joy.
Getting there.
You deserve not just a family, but you also deserve some joy. Well, my family was really rough. My mother grew up in Nazi Germany, and she had a lot of the values of that, and it was very nasty. And I tended to want to show up. She once said to me, "Why do you do so much?" But it was a very controlled environment. I really wasn't allowed to have friends. I was working all the time, and when it came around to my thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, I remember sitting at the dinner table a number of times, and I would throw out, I think I want to be a teacher. No. I think I want to be a nurse. No. I think I want to be an astronaut. No. And I would just throw things out there, and I kept getting no, 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 no. But by this time, I had already recognized that I was going to be raising myself. And it was expected that I was going to go into the traditional German housewife role. And in Germany, they put mothers on a pedestal. And women who work, they're called the Rabenmutter, which is the raven mother, the very destructive mother. So they have some really deep, difficult attitudes towards women who work. And so a lot of my family members are very much into the motherhood thing. But anyway, yeah, it was not a supportive environment by any means. But I used my sensitivity just to make sure I stayed awake and processed and worked and learned whatever I could. And I think in a lot of ways, it stood me in good stead. But it's not an experience I would wish for anybody else. It certainly wasn't a happy childhood. I'm the only one who kind of escaped the very rigid religiosity, right-wing patriarchal mindset that is still very much my family. And probably my sensitivity saved me in some ways. And that's kind of how I look at it today, even though it was really, really difficult. So our next question is, as you grew up and took your place in the world, how did being sensitive affect you and what you were able to do, including decisions about work, marriage, and family? Did it sideline you? Did it help you? What are your thoughts about that when you were becoming an adult, starting out in the world, saying, "World, here I come"?
I don't think I ever said "World, here I come." I think that's something I've just only well in recent years started to
That's
say.
too much confidence, right?
No such thing, Maria. I think for me, I just don't think I really was fully ever showing up in my life. That's how I feel. I don't think I was really fully living it because I was always second guessing myself and checking to see whether, you know, I was pleasing everybody around me and that I was doing the right thing. I mean, there was a bit of rebellion that also went on because of that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was out of home as soon as I could be out of home and, you know, running around fearlessly as we often do when we're young. But, you know, I was making sure, you know, that I was presenting, you know, the right image, you know, wherever I needed to present that. But I think the term I've heard is sensation seeking HSP.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, I can suddenly become a very extroverted and rush out into the world, you know, and want to get up to all sorts of adventures. But then, you know, it will wear out quite quickly. I mean, when I was younger, I was known as the person who would just disappear. So, you know, we would all go out for the evening, and then I would get to a point where I just couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand the noise, you know, I couldn't stand the conversation, and I would literally just disappear. And though we didn't have mobile phones in those days, so, you know, the next day the phone would be ringing, you know, and people would be, well, what happened to you last night? And I couldn't really ever I just used to, I think, lie, you know, I couldn't really articulate why I struggled so much with having fun. I could up to a point, but then suddenly I just was overwhelmed and overstimulated and I just, you know, couldn't stand it anymore. So, so I think that's probably got me into trouble a few times over the years, you know, because I think I have probably been quite naive. But like we were saying before, you know, it's a bit like there isn't really any pretending, you know, we're the human lie detectors for other people and for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we just know if somebody is, you think, well, no, that's, I don't think that's true, you know, and also it makes it virtually impossible to tell a lie. Or I think we are really good at telling lies. You know, I was watching a podcast about, you know, these ex-CIA people, you know, and they're saying that they actually select introverts
Wow.
to be agents because
Really?
they have the qualities, and of course introversion and high sensitivity often go together, which I thought was absolutely fascinating because you know that they're like a number, or they were at one time or the other number one on their list of recruits. So I think that, you know, it can go both ways. I think in some ways it can be quite difficult to lie because you can hear your own insincerity, and that's very difficult. But equally well, I think over the years I've got really good at it. Because a lot of life was pretending. It was, you know, it was I've got to survive,
Yeah, sure.
and I feel vulnerable and unsafe everywhere, and so I've got to pretend to be someone else. I mean, I was never fooling myself. And really, over the years, I just made myself ill in one way, shape, or form. So, yeah, surviving, I would say, was what it was all about. And just yeah, pleasing others, fitting the mold, you know, that had been set out for me. And I think that I couldn't sustain the choices I made because I wasn't really making them. I was just
Yeah.
doing what I thought other people, you know, or society wanted me to do. It didn't really occur to me, you know, that I was allowed to make a choice.
Yeah, I think in worlds that demand obedience, you
Mm.
get punished for being disobedient, and that's where the pleasing comes from. It's
Hmm.
really not a personality trait, it's more of a strategy that you use to survive.
Yeah,
And the world has demanded obedience, especially, I mean, for men too. I mean, it's just obedience oriented for everybody, but
absolutely.
especially so for women. And
Yes.
so, and a lot of the things we're expected, a lot of the ways in which we're expected to be obedient are not necessarily in our interests. But there
Mhm.
is that expectation that if you're going to be included, there is a price to pay. You know, I remember reading about in Great Britain, the lawyers, they would get together after work and you were expected to drink.
Mhm.
And even if that's not good for your health. And so there is this price that you're expected to pay for inclusion. I happen to be not a fan of that nonsense, but nonetheless, you know, it is there. And so, you know, those demands and expectations, if you want to survive, I mean, there's something you have to reckon with, you know, and there's no real shame in it, but you do have to recognize the price you're paying and then see if, you know, what do I do with my life where I have a greater quality of life. Just let's just call it quality of life, because often the price we have to pay is actually harms our health at a minimum, you know.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I guess that's part of the journey. And that's we're trying to move out of these very demanding cultures that want total obedience. And you know, if we're going to reclaim our intelligence, and as sensitive people, we don't have a choice. Our intelligence is hitting us all the time, you know, through
Mm.
our nervous system. You know, we have to move beyond that. And I think, you know, as we make progress, the world will actually be more comfortable for people who are sensitive. And people may find, sensitive people may find that they're more welcome because their intelligence will add value and people will be looking for that. At least the optimist in me, maybe it's my naivete likes to think so.
It's interesting because I have a theory, a favorite theory of mine is that, you know, the sensitive, highly sensitive ones, you know, maybe everyone should be like that. You know, maybe that is that finely tuned human is how everyone should be. But, you know, through various processes, you know, over the centuries, you know, I believe, you know, that human beings, we're not allowed to reach our full potential in so many ways and for so many reasons. And it occurs to me that, you know, perhaps we're already, as highly sensitive people, where the rest of humanity, you know, could be.
Yeah, evolving to, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that, Jenny. And for me, I mean, I always have thought, before I knew what high sensitivity was, I always thought of myself as highly empathic because I could
Mhm.
pick up on other people's states of mind, states of being, emotions. And so I just thought of it as having a higher level of empathy than most other people. And that actually worked for me in a couple of different ways. One, it made me much more curious about other people, and I studied journalism in college. And when I left, and then I switched to English, but then when I left school, my first jobs were working in, I became a corporate writer where I had to tell the corporation story and I had to understand, had to interview leaders in the corporations that I was working for. Um, and experts at all levels and translate what they were saying into language that our customers could make sense of. And then I spent a few years being a freelance journalist and getting to interview some really fascinating people, mostly here locally in Atlanta, but a few national and international figures, and helping them get their story out and being sort of the channel for that. And then I ended up going into health communications and trying to translate scientific research around health practices and healthcare into information that the average layperson could understand and act on. And so in some ways, the sensitivity helped me decipher read between the lines of what these people were telling me and decipher what it was that they really wanted to say and distill it and help them get their message out into the world. And that was really wonderful for me. That gave me a lot of self-esteem and really helped build my courage in some ways and my confidence in some ways that I needed. But then earlier in my career, when I was still in school, both high school and early in my college career, whenever I felt like people had gotten the wrong impression of me or a bad impression of me, I leaned into that. And I was like, you want to see a bad bitch? Pardon my language, but you want to see a bad bitch? I will show you just how bad I can be. And you will be sorry. And I made some enemies and I have some regrets about that phase of my life, but it was punk rock. It was the 80s, you know, it was rebellion and down with the patriarchy, down with the monarchy, even though I'm not British.
I'm with you on that one. No, I'm with you.
I'm with you too.
Down with everything that did not support women, that did not support growth and peace and kindness and empathy. I keep coming back to empathy. I've always thought empathy was my superpower. And now it turns out maybe being highly sensitive is actually my superpower and has been all along. Because it's given me all these protective layers. It's given me this ability to be out front when I sense that there is no way to win. Then I'm just going to speak my truth and be who I am. And if you don't like it, sucks to be you.
Yep.
And to really form deeper connections with people that are open to it, because usually they're highly sensitive too. And they have that same desire for connection and belonging that I do.
Cool. I don't know that a lot of sensitive people go there because it does take a long time for sensitive people to get to a place where they're ready to do that, where they have the kind of self-acceptance, because there's so much to process and there's so much self-doubt that we get. But if you can get to a place where you're that secure with yourself, that's a really great thing. So
I wouldn't call it secure. I got to a place where I really had nothing else to lose.
oh, well,
And at that point, okay, if I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down burning brightly.
we have time for one more question. So I want to get to the subject of being sensitive and childless and the grieving process. So when did you start thinking you would be childless, and has being sensitive made a difference, both positive or negative, in your grieving process?
Well, believe it or not, I was clinging to a shred of hope right up until menopause. And I look back now and I think really I was delusional. But
Okay.
I think it was really because it was only when I was already in perimenopause that I had fully admitted to myself, you know, that I wanted to have a child. And I knew I was out of time. And so I just kept hoping that a miracle would happen. You know, I think that was the stage I was at. You know, I was at the stage of a miracle. And I really only fully accepted it, you know, when I reached menopause, because you can't argue with that. That's it, isn't it? That's the end of it. So I would say in terms of, and also I think at that time, you know, I was really blaming myself, you know, for not having realized this sooner, or have to have found a way to articulate it or act upon it in my life and make different choices sooner. But, you know, as we know, it's a multi-layered experience that we're living. So it's not as simple as, you know, one thing that leads us, you know, to a certain point in our life. But I think in terms of the grieving process, it was intense. But then again, that is my experience as an HSP. My experience of life is intense. So I remember, yeah, there were 6 months of feeling devastated, really. But as I say, other losses and you know, experiences in my life have also felt the same. That's just how it is for me. You know, I will go hard, you know, into any kind of emotion, which I think a lot of highly sensitive people all would say the same thing. And it's probably not exclusively highly sensitive people either. You know, everyone is at a different place at different times on the emotional scale. But I think, you know, the thing with being highly sensitive is that there is always like a silver lining, because as hard as it can be to be sensitive, the joy is off the scale. You know, the good stuff is off the scale. And I think once we've been through a grief process, or once I went through this grief process and completed the processing, which also prolongs it, because, you know, we're very aware, we're super aware. That's definitely a superpower of us. We're self-aware, and we're aware on behalf of other people as well. Yeah. And I think that once we've been through that process, we've gathered so much information, we know how to help ourselves. And I think naturally we respond to our environment. And so once we, you know, we are ready to move on, I think that, you know, the awareness that we gain can be like a map. It shows us the path forward. I think our sensitivity can almost begin to plot our course forwards. So that was really my experience.
It is intense, isn't it? It is intense.
Oh,
I wouldn't trade it though, because, you know, one of the things you get out of going into the intensity and being with it and processing it, you don't get blocked.
Yes.
And it may be that, you know, we have the opportunity to become unblocked in the way other people do not. And that has its own challenges if other people are in a different place. But still, there's something to be said for that, because that enables you then to access some joy, as you were saying.
And we're less likely to repeat, you know, because we have done that processing and we have developed, you know, that awareness. I think being an HSP is really like it's like a growth path. I think that we are always and forever. I mean, it is possible to try and switch it off, but actually I'm sure I've done that. I've tried that a lot. It's like, right, I'm just not even gonna go there. I'm just gonna live. I'm gonna live in this narrow little, you know, corridor here, like I see other people doing, and I'm just not gonna go there. And the thing is that makes me ill as well, you know, because it builds up, you know, it just builds that's it, you know. So sooner or later it's going to come out, you know, in anger or illness or, you know, whatever. So absolutely. Yeah.
How about you, Karen? How was the grieving process for you?
Well, so I think I already mentioned this, but I didn't actually go through the grief process because I was in denial that I was childless.
Oh, okay.
For a number of years. I really started going through it about 5 years ago. We moved my mom in with us, and my husband and I are her caregivers, and she has lived with us for the last 5 years. And what really opened my eyes to the fact that I was not child-free, but actually childless, was recognizing that I'm not going to have kids there to take care of me when I'm old the way my mom does with me. And I am her only child now. since we lost my brother. And so it's a lot on me, and my husband has been incredibly wonderful about taking her in and helping with everything that she needs. I'm truly grateful for his support and his kindness to her and his love for me and his love for her. But it wasn't until I was really good at denial. And it wasn't until I could no longer deny that this was not, in fact, a choice I made. This was me accepting that life had other plans for me, that I was able to start really grieving it. And the last 4 or 5 years doing it in isolation, in lockdown, during a pandemic, it's been really hard, and I'm still working my way through it. I'm not on the other side yet. I see the other side now. And what started me down that path was thinking, well, who's going to be there for me when I'm old? And I finally, not too long ago, like within the last few months, came to the realization that, well, the first most important person who has to be there for me when I'm old is me right now. The ways that I have neglected myself and neglected my health and turned away from the things that I wasn't ready to face. I don't have that luxury anymore of turning away from health issues like my Leiden factor 5 and what that means for my future. Like a couple of other chronic health conditions, because those things never come to you as just one that you have to deal with. If you have chronic health conditions, quite often you have 2 or 3. And so I have other conditions that that I'm managing as well. And so what childlessness and what being childless and being highly sensitive have done for me is, one, it allowed me to sort of delay the grieving process for a while until I was strong enough to handle it. And now, as I am starting to see the light at the end of that tunnel of deep grief, and I think too, all of the early losses that I had that I was still grieving and mourning, I just couldn't deal with all of them at once.
Oh, of course not. Yeah.
And so this was the last, hopefully, this is not the last one. There will be more grief in the future, I'm sure, because my mother is 90. But this was the one that comes up now. And being highly sensitive and knowing that about myself, it's given me tools and keys now that I'm able to talk about it with my therapist, to talk about it with the group that you led for so long, Maria, to talk about it with my friends, to manage my emotions better than I ever have in my life.
Yeah, I think sensitivity can, if you really work the deep processing, that can give you a huge amount of control. So something can arise and you can be with it, then you can make a choice. And that's a huge amount of control. My ex-husband said to me, "You have great control." I don't think that was necessarily a happy statement on his part. But yeah, you can, because when you've processed everything and you've come to terms with something and made a decision about something, you've got some knowledge about it, it becomes part of your inner resources, and that becomes so incredibly valuable. So, and you've been through a lot. You have had a lot of losses. I'm not surprised that it has taken you a long time, to get this. And but I think the grieving at some point does come to an end. You actually do become a different person because of it. I think you do become someone who's very solid in themselves. I think sensitive people have a chance with their grieving process to become very much more solid in themselves than someone perhaps who thinks they're just grieving childlessness. I mean, I personally think you're grieving a lot of things like you did in your family. I had family too, but things like the patriarchy and all of that, I think there is a lot of that you grieve along with childlessness. So I think it's a very deep grieving process, but you get to be in a very solid place as a result of your grieving. And I think we get more information about ourselves as sensitive people, and that can be a benefit.
When you say that, it makes me think that being highly sensitive is actually an advantage when you go through these big losses. Because one of the things that I've noticed about myself and other highly sensitive people, we're willing to confront the deep emotion, the big topics, the hard things
Mhm.
that most people would run miles out of their way to avoid.
Mhm.
For us, those things are just life.
Mhm.
And we just,
Plow right in.
yeah. And so it really is a superpower
It
Yeah.
is.
if you
Some
let
people
it
might
be.
call us masochists, but I think that we're terrific.
Yeah. But I think sometimes people like that. People often say to me, they say, you just jump right in, don't you? And yeah, I do.
Yes.
And I think I used to temper that, but now I'm just like, well, you know what, you can stay or you can go. It's up to you, but that's how it is.
Mhm.
Okay, so I've looked in the Q&A section, and I've answered a few of the questions. Because we have quite a few, I'm going to suggest that people, our listeners, some of the questions are rather substantial, like, all the different capabilities of being sensitive and about ADHD and sensitivity. I'm going to recommend that you look for the work of Elaine Aron. Her last name is Aron, excuse me. She wrote The Highly Sensitive Person, and it's considered the Bible of sensitivity. She has a couple of other books out as well, including on relationships and things like that. So I would recommend you familiarize yourself with her writings, because she will give you a really strong picture and a deep picture, because she goes into everything just like we all do, and that will support you in understanding your sensitivity. And so that would probably be a really good place for you to go ahead and learn more about the sensitive trait. There's a lot of different kinds of neurodiversity. People think that autism and sensitivity may be similar, but they're really not. There can be quite a bit of confusion, because I think there's so much research going on in the world about sensitivity. But anyway, if you go to her books, that's a really good starting point for understanding about your sensitivity. And so that will at least get you started, and at least you won't feel so as if you're flailing around trying to understand the trait. So we are about out of time. So I want to thank our panelists for their beautiful insights and wisdom. It's been an eye-opening and fun discussion. As Stephanie said, we've recorded this event, and it'll be available on the World Childless Week YouTube channel. I hope you can share it with your friends and acquaintances in the childless world, even in your families, if that makes sense to do so. Please also visit the World Childless Week website to learn more about our panelists and to connect with them. And we're going to close with this poem by Leah Cox, which was written for sensitive people. And the name of the poem is Poem for the Sensitive Ones. You cry at the sound of a bird's beating wings, the smile of a stranger, and 1,000 more things. You're walking the path of awakening to love, yet often you feel you're not quite enough. Loud noises, they scare you. People don't understand. You feel like an alien from a faraway land. Anxiety so often gets its hooks in your mind, and depression can come very swiftly behind. But it's not your fault. This you must know. When you question so deeply, it can lead to a low. Your joy can be higher than the highest known tree, and your sorrow as deep as the deepest blue sea. You're creative, intuitive, and an empath too. With so many gifts, it's hard to know what to do. Your heart, it cries out for the pain of the earth, and you desperately long to do something of worth. Perfectionist tendencies can keep you held back, but with just a little encouragement, you'll soon have the knack of keeping on going and moving along, because now more than ever, the world longs for your song. So I hope you enjoyed that. And you enjoyed our conversation. I think the world does need our song, and we're learning how to sing it, and that's a great thing. And I hope you will also join me tomorrow for our Queens Around the World webinar. It'll be at this time. And we'll be talking about what it's like to be childless in different cultures. So we'll be talking about the patriarchy and our own experiences. And it'll be interesting because I spoke with all the panelists, and some of the more liberal communities don't necessarily aren't as open-minded as we might think. So I think it's going to be an interesting conversation, and I hope you all join us. So, any last words before we sign off? Either Jenny?
I think just thank you for the opportunity to participate, Maria. This is, I think I said this before, but this is my first real step out speaking about my life and my experience as both a childless person and a highly sensitive person. And you've made it very comfortable and easy for me to do that. So thank you. And thank you to everybody who has put something in the chat to express sympathy, empathy, solidarity, connection. That means so much. And I just think this was a really wonderful webinar, really wonderful experience. And I'm so grateful to have been able to be a part of it.
Well, I'm glad you could make it. It's wonderful. And how about you, Jenny?
Well, I think I'm really encouraged. I'm just really encouraged because we don't see an awful lot of events like this. And I think it would be great, to develop this.
Okay.
It is a little bit challenging, I think I present, a certain way, but, probably like a lot of people, it's not that easy, to sort of get into the swing of this kind of disclosure, but it's so worth doing because the insights, that I've had tonight from you ladies, has been amazing. And obviously I will be processing that over the next few days. Surprise, surprise. So just thinking, about when I look at the numbers of people, on a Zoom, I always can envisage, everybody almost like sitting around us in a circle, and I love that feeling of sisterhood, and that if there's anybody, who hears things that resonate, then it's fantastic. So
yeah, and all sensitive people are different, and we have different backgrounds. We have different characteristics. I mean, there's some sensitive people who are very sensitive to touch, some more so hearing. I mean, there's so many different ways in which sensitive people manifest. Some people are more empathic than others, actually.
Yeah.
Empaths and highly sensitive people are considered somewhat different. I happen to think they're very similar, but there's people have their definitions, but I think that being an empath is part of being highly sensitive. But anyway, yeah, we're all different. We all show up differently, and our early years do make a difference in how we show up in the world as a sensitive.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it seems to me that there are other sort of there's other neurodiversity, which gets a bit more exposure. I might be wrong because I live very much under the radar, so quite often I miss things. But tools for highly sensitive people is really important.
It is. Yeah, and the books by Dr. Aaron are very helpful for people getting started learning about their sensitivity. So that's a really good place to start.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been absolutely fabulous. I've enjoyed it myself. It's always great to meet people who are similar to me because there aren't too many around me. So I'll take it under my, I will process about our doing this in the future.
Understood.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Maria.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
Lovely to meet you, Karen.
You too, Jenny.
Okay, so